you know the feeling. That strange, inner vibration of chaos. It feels like anxiety, like doubt, like the terrifying premonition that your life is about to shatter into a million pieces. You fight it, you numb it, you try to outrun it, believing it's a sign of breakdown. But what if that feeling is not a warning that you're about to fall apart, but a signal that you are about to level up? This story will reveal the quantum truth behind that inner dissonance. It will show you how to decode its message and use it as the fuel for the greatest transformation of your life. By the end, you won't fear that feeling anymore. You will welcome it as the sound of your own becoming. Julian was a ghost in the machine of his own talent. At 35, he was a celebrated concert pianist, a master of Chopin and Rachmaninoff, renowned for a technical brilliance that critics called unassailable and flawless. From the outside, his life was a masterpiece of discipline and success, a perfectly executed symphony of prestigious tours, sold-out venues, and critical acclaim. But inside, in the silent space between the notes, there was nothing. He felt like a highly advanced player piano, his hands moving with a memory and precision that had long ago become disconnected from his heart. The applause at the end of each performance felt like a roar of static, a confirmation of the hollow space where his own music should have been. His deepest, most secret desire was to compose. He dreamed of creating music that was not a perfect replication of a dead man's genius, but a living, breathing expression of his own soul. He yearned to feel the ecstatic current of creation flow through him, to write a single bar of music that was truly, authentically his. But this desire was a fragile, whispered thing, easily silenced by his powerful, lifelong antagonist, the specter of perfectionism. This internal tyrant demanded absolute mastery, flawless execution, and adherence to the established rules of the greats. It allowed no room for error, for experimentation, for the messy, vulnerable act of creation. It told him his only value was in being a perfect vessel for the work of others. The feeling began as a low, internal hum, a dissonant frequency that started weeks ago. He'd tried to ignore it, dismissing it as fatigue or stress. But tonight, on stage at the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam, the hum had escalated. It was a vibration of pure chaos that started in his gut and was now making his hands tremble. It felt like every cell in his body was being pulled out of tune. He finished the piece on muscle memory alone, the final chord sounding like a scream in the sudden silence of the hall. He took his bow to a standing ovation, but the only sound he could hear was the terrifying, internal static. He wasn't just losing his edge, he felt like he was losing the very fabric of his reality. Was this the beginning of the end, the sound of his meticulously built life finally shattering? Or was it, as his soul faintly dared to hope, the violent, chaotic birth of something new? If you have ever felt that inner chaos, that sense of vibrating on the edge of a breakdown, then subscribe and stay for this journey. What you are about to discover may change your life. The dissonant hum from the performance did not fade. It became the new, terrifying soundtrack to Julian's life. This was the closing of the previous loop. The public falling apart moment had shattered his composure and forced him to admit that his problem was not something he could fix with more practice. The vibration was a constant, unnerving reminder that his foundation was cracked. He cancelled the remainder of his tour, citing exhaustion, a lie that felt insultingly simple compared to the complex, energetic chaos he was actually experiencing. He retreated into the quiet solitude of his apartment, overlooking one of Amsterdam's serene canals, but the external peace only amplified his inner noise. Desperate for an answer that his classical training could not provide, he started walking the city for hours, avoiding the grand museums and concert halls that had once been his temples. He found himself drawn to the city's hidden corners, the narrow streets of the Jordan district, the quirky, esoteric bookshops. One rainy afternoon, a small, intriguing flyer taped to a lamppost caught his eye. It was for a lecture series at a small university annex. The title read, Sonic Resonance and the Architecture of Consciousness. It felt both absurd and magnetically compelling. The speaker was a Dr. Eris Thorne, described as a quantum physicist and cymatic researcher. Julian, a man who had dedicated his life to the structured, predictable world of classical music, felt a pull toward this fringe science he couldn't explain. He went. The lecture hall was a small, intimate space, and Dr. Thorne was not what he expected. She was a woman in her late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes that danced with an amused, knowing light. She spoke of the universe not as a collection of objects, but as a symphony of vibrating strings. She showed stunning cymatic videos of sound waves organizing sand and water into exquisite, complex geometric patterns. "This is the universe's secret," she explained, her voice both calming and electrifying. "Chaos is not the enemy of order. It is the raw material from which a higher, more complex order is born." After the lecture, Julian approached her, his usual articulate confidence gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability. He tried to describe the feeling, the dissonant hum, the sense of falling apart. He expected skepticism. Instead, Eris nodded slowly, a deep recognition in her eyes. "Ah," she said softly. "The sound of an energetic upgrade. Your old signature is dissolving. The new one has not yet cohered. You are in the sacred, chaotic space in between." We learn here of Julian's background, a child prodigy, drilled by a stern and demanding father who was also a famous conductor. His entire life had been a relentless pursuit of a single ideal of perfection, leaving no room for his own voice. Eris invited him to her private research studio, a place she called the resonance chamber. She gave him no promises, no solutions, only a cryptic and unsettling task. "Before our first session," she said, "I want you to go home, sit at your piano, and do not play a single note. Your task is to simply find the sound of your own silence." He had found a potential guide who spoke a language that resonated with his deepest fears and hopes. But what was the sound of silence? And how could a man whose entire life was defined by producing sound possibly find it in the terrifying quiet of his own being? Julian went home and tried to follow Eris's bizarre instructions. This closed the previous loop. He had found his mentor and received his first task. But the new loop of conflict opened the moment he sat on the polished ebony bench in front of his magnificent Fazioli grand piano. The silence in the room was immense, a heavy blanket that seemed to absorb all life. He closed his eyes and tried to listen, but what he heard was a deafening cacophony. The inner hum, the dissonant vibration, was now screaming at him. It was a chaotic orchestra of self-doubt, fear of the future, and the judgmental voice of his deceased father, listing all the ways he was failing. The silence was not empty, it was filled with the ghosts of his own perfectionism. He lasted 10 minutes before a wave of panic sent him bolting from the room, his heart pounding. The task was impossible. It was like trying to find a point of stillness in the heart of a hurricane. He arrived at Eris's studio the next week feeling like a complete failure. The studio was a wondrous place, part physics lab, part temple of sound. Strange, beautiful instruments, singing bowls, tuning forks the size of swords, a glass harmonica, were arranged around a central platform covered in a fine layer of white sand. Eris listened patiently as Julian described his failure. "You didn't fail," she corrected gently. "You succeeded. You heard the noise that you have been using music to drown out your entire life. That is the sound of your current frequency. Now, the work begins." The external conflict intensified when his agent, a pragmatic and well-meaning man named Marcus, flew in from London, refusing to be put off any longer. Marcus sat in Julian's pristine apartment, a stark contrast of corporate ambition against Julian's quiet desperation. "Julian, this rest has gone on long enough," he said, his tone firm. "I have the offer of a lifetime for you. A 16-city world tour as the headline soloist with the Berlin Philharmonic. This is the pinnacle. This is what we've worked for. They need a commitment by the end of the month." The offer was a powerful lure, a path back to the familiar, glittering world he knew. It was a lifeline back to the person he used to be. During his next session, Eris introduced a concept that shattered Julian's classical worldview. She quoted the physicist David Bohm, saying, "In the implicate order, everything is enfolded into everything else. It is a realm of undivided wholeness." She explained that the dissonant frequency he was feeling was not a flaw in his system, It was his consciousness trying to enfold a new, more complex reality, a higher order of being. Your mind, trained for the explicate order of linear notes and predictable structures, is interpreting this enfolding process as chaos, she said. Stop fighting it. Stop trying to silence it. Your next task is to begin to map it. He was being pulled in two directions, the pinnacle of his old life calling to him, while this strange new path demanded he dive deeper into the chaos he feared. How could he possibly map a feeling of pure dissonance, and what would that map even look like? The task of mapping the dissonance felt even more abstract than finding the sound of silence. The previous loop closed, he now understood his mission was not to fight the chaos, but to explore it. He returned to his apartment and for the first time in his life, he approached his work without a goal of perfection. He bought a large, unlined artist's sketchbook and a set of charcoal pencils. Whenever the chaotic hum intensified, he would close his eyes and let his hand move across the page, trying to translate the feeling into a physical form. At first, the drawings were just frantic, angry scribbles, a visual representation of his inner state. But slowly, over days of this strange practice, a pattern began to emerge from the chaos. He wasn't drawing random lines, he was drawing spirals. Tight, anxious spirals when the feeling was overwhelming, and looser, more graceful spirals when a sense of calm broke through. The subtrauma with his agent, Marcus, added a layer of intense pressure. Marcus called daily, his voice growing more urgent as the deadline for the Berlin Philharmonic tour approached. "Julian, what is going on? People are talking. They're saying you've lost your nerve. This is your legacy we're talking about." Marcus wasn't a villain, he was the voice of the world Julian had always known, the voice of logical progression and tangible achievement. His concern was a constant, powerful pull, a temptation to abandon this frightening, uncertain inner journey and return to the safety of the known. His isolation deepened. He stopped answering calls from friends and colleagues in the music world. They wouldn't understand. How could he explain that he was spending his days drawing the shape of his anxiety instead of practicing his scales? He was caught between two worlds. The first was the world of his past, embodied by Marcus and the Berlin offer, a world of clear goals and external validation. The second was the world of his potential future, represented by Eris and her cryptic teachings, a world of internal exploration with no clear destination. The ticking clock of the tour deadline forced him into a liminal space, a quantum state of superposition where he was both the celebrated concert pianist and the lost, searching artist. The pressure was building towards a breaking point. His sketchbook filled with hundreds of spirals, a frantic, beautiful map of a man on the edge of a monumental choice. He has found a pattern in his personal chaos, a mysterious spiral that seems to hold a secret. But with the biggest opportunity of his life about to expire, will this esoteric discovery be enough to guide his decision, or will the crushing logic of his old world pull him back under? The day before he had to give Marcus his final answer, Julian was in a state of profound turmoil. He sat in his apartment, the tour contract on one side of his coffee table and his sketchbook full of spirals on the other. They represented two completely different realities, and he knew that by the end of the day, he would have to collapse the wave and choose one. He felt paralyzed, the dissonant hum building to a fever pitch. He was falling apart. He took the sketchbook and fled to the one place he might find an answer, Eris's studio. The loop of his indecision was about to close. He burst into the resonance chamber, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and laid the open sketchbook on Eris's workbench. "Spirals," he said, his voice strained. "It's all spirals. What does it mean?" Eris looked at the drawings, and a slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. This was the moment of revelation she had been waiting for. "Julian," she said, her voice resonating with a quiet power. "What you see as a map of your anxiety is in fact a blueprint. The spiral is the universe's signature of creation. It is the shape of a galaxy, the curve of a seashell, the growth pattern of a plant, the vortex of water going down a drain. It is the geometric form of energy efficiently stepping up or down from one state to another. This is not the map of your breakdown. It is the schematic of your becoming." She led him to the cymatic platform and poured a thin layer of fine, black sand onto its surface. She picked up a cello bow and drew it gently across the edge of a large crystal singing bowl. As the bowl began to sing a pure, rising tone, the sand, which had been in a chaotic, random state, began to move. It vibrated, shifted, and in a matter of seconds, organized itself into a breathtakingly perfect, multi-layered spiral. Julian stared, his mind finally silent. He was watching his inner feeling being made manifest in the physical world. In that moment, the dissonant hum inside him shifted. It didn't disappear, but it changed in quality. The chaotic, frightening static resolved into a complex, multi-layered chord. It was the sound of coherence being born from chaos. A quote Eris had shared from Dr. Joe Dispenza suddenly became a felt reality. To be empowered is to be so free, so unlimited, that you are no longer defined by your past. He wasn't Julian, the perfect pianist. He was a field of infinite potential, and the spirals were the shape of his own evolution. The how of his future was irrelevant. He finally understood. His only job was to become the person, the frequency, that could create from this new, higher state of order. He has finally decoded the message. The chaos is a blueprint for his own becoming. This changes everything. But what does a man do with such a profound revelation? How does this cosmic understanding translate into a real-world decision that will alter the course of his life forever? This moment of quantum insight has sparked something in you? Subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden architecture of reality. The experience in Eris's studio was the fulcrum on which Julian's entire life pivoted. The previous loop closed. He had understood the message of the spiral. Now, he had to act from that understanding. He walked out of the resonance chamber, the complex, coherent chord still humming in his being, and made the most important phone call of his life. He called Marcus. He didn't offer a long, convoluted explanation. He simply said, "Marcus, thank you for everything. But I have to decline the tour. I'm going in a new direction." There was a long, stunned silence on the other end, followed by a torrent of confused, angry questions. Julian listened calmly, without defending his decision. He was no longer operating on that frequency. He was a different person than he was that morning. The call ended with Marcus saying, "You're throwing away your life, Julian." But Julian knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that he was finally choosing to begin it. The consequences of his decision were immediate and severe. By turning down the tour, he was effectively blacklisted. The classical music world is small, and the story that circulated was that Julian Vestergaard, the brilliant prodigy, had suffered a nervous breakdown. His income vanished overnight. His savings, while substantial, would not last forever. He was in the void. He had let go of the branch of his old life without having a new one to grab onto. The fear was real and at times, overwhelming. There were days when the dissonant hum returned, laced with the terror that he had made a catastrophic mistake. But his actions now stemmed from a different place. Instead of practicing Rachmaninoff for 8 hours a day, he spent his time with Eris, learning to stabilize and understand his new frequency. He started to translate the sound he now heard, the coherent, spiraling chord, into actual music. He would sit at his piano, not with a goal of composition, but with the intention of being a channel. He would close his eyes, tune into that inner vibration, and let his hands move. The music that emerged was unlike anything he had ever heard. It was minimalist yet complex, with strange, beautiful harmonies that seemed to mirror the geometric patterns of the cymatics. It was the sound of his own alignment. This was his new practice, not perfection, but expression. The world saw a man who was falling apart, a brilliant career in ruins. But from the inside, for the first time in his life, he felt completely whole. He has made a courageous, world-shattering choice and is now floating in the void between his past and future. He is creating a new kind of music, but he is utterly alone. Can he hold this fragile new frequency long enough for the physical world to catch up, or will the harsh realities of survival force him back to the man he used to be? The void was Julian's crucible. The weeks turned into 3 months of profound isolation and financial pressure. This was the test promised in the last chapter, the universe asking him if his transformation was a fleeting insight or an embodied, unshakable truth. There were moments of intense doubt where the temptation to call Marcus and beg for any small performance was almost unbearable. His meticulously ordered life had dissolved into a formless, uncertain existence. This was the ultimate challenge, to trust the implicate order when the explicate world was reflecting back only lack and failure. He consolidated his growth not through grand actions, but through small, consistent acts of faith. He continued his sessions with Eris, who guided him not as a teacher, but as a fellow explorer. They experimented with tuning his piano to non-standard frequencies, using the principles of sonic geometry to create scales that resonated more closely with the vibrations he was now perceiving. He developed a daily practice that was part meditation, part deep listening, and part composition. He was learning to live in a state of quantum alignment, holding the frequency of his desired reality even when his bank account dwindled and his phone remained silent. His growth became visible in his music. He finished a single, 20-minute piece. He titled it Implicate, in honor of Bohm's theory. The composition was a journey in sound, beginning with a low, dissonant hum, which then slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to organize itself. It built through complex, spiraling arpeggios and harmonies that defied traditional classification, finally resolving into a chord of such profound peace and coherence that it felt like coming home. It was the sound of a man leveling up. It was a masterpiece, but it existed only for him, a secret conversation between his soul and the universe. The loneliness of this was immense. The final layer of his old self that needed to be shed was his reliance on an audience for validation. He had to learn that the music was complete and perfect even if no one else ever heard it. He has created a masterpiece from the ashes
of his old life, a testament to his profound inner transformation. But what is the purpose of a new frequency if it is not broadcast? What is the point of a masterpiece with no one to hear it, and what will it take for him to share the sacred, vulnerable part of his soul with the world? The completion of Implicate marked a new phase. The loop of his lonely creation was closed. Now, a new one opened, the need to broadcast his new frequency. The idea of performing again was terrifying. It wasn't the fear of technical imperfection that scared him now, but the fear of being misunderstood, of having this deeply personal, sacred music judged by the old standards. For weeks, he hesitated. The composition sat on his piano, a silent testament to a journey no one else had witnessed. The catalyst came from an unexpected place. While walking through the Vondel Park, he saw a small, beautiful 17th century chapel, the Vondelkerk, that knew sometimes used for intimate concerts. It was small, acoustically vibrant, and felt separate from the grand, intimidating concert halls of his past. A feeling, a quiet, intuitive knowing, told him that this was the place. The thought of organizing a concert himself, of sending out invitations and hoping people would show up, felt like a task for a different person, a different lifetime. But he knew it was the next necessary step. He was not doing it for applause or for a career. He was doing it as the final act of his transformation, a declaration to the universe that he was no longer a vessel for other people's music, but a source of his own. The tension began to build. He used a significant portion of his remaining savings to rent the chapel for one night. He sent out simple, elegant invitations via email to a small, curated list, a few open-minded music critics, local artists he admired, patrons of the arts known for supporting experimental work, and, in a final act of letting go, to his former agent, Marcus. He didn't ask Aris to come, and knew she would understand that he did todo this alone. In the days leading up to the performance, the dissonantum returned, but this time, he recognized it not as anxiety, but as the sound of a massive amount of energy gathering, of a system preparing for a stage change. He wasn't falling apart. He was powering up. The stage is set in a small, sacred space. The invitations have been sent into the void. He is about to broadcast his soul's frequency for the first time. How will a world accustomed to the predictable classics respond to this strange, new sound born from quantum alignment? The night of the performance was cool and clear. Julian walked into the Vondelkerk an hour early and found it completely empty. A wave of cold fear washed over him. He had risked everything for this, and no one was coming. The old voice of failure screamed in his mind. But he walked to the magnificent pipe organ at the back of the chapel, which he attuned to his specific frequencies, and sat down. He closed his eyes and returned to his practice. He was not here to perform for an audience, he was here to make an offering to the universe. When he opened his eyes 20 minutes later, the chapel was no longer empty. It was full, but there were perhaps 30 people scattered in the pews, their faces curious and expectant. He saw a few critics he recognized, some young artists, and near the back, looking uncomfortable and out of place, was Marcus. Julian walked to the center of the chapel, where a single grand piano stood, and he gave a small, genuine smile. He began to play. Implicate filled the sacred space. The piece began with the low, unsettling dissonance, and the cold feel a palpable tension rippled through the small audience. But then, as the music began its slow, spiraling ascent, something magical happened. The chapel's unique acoustics amplified the resonant frequencies, and the music became more than just sound. It was a physical presence, a vibrational feel that washed over everyone in the room. It was no longer playing the notes, it was the frequency. It was a channel, his hands moving with an intuitive grace that made his former technical perfection feel like a cheap imitation. The music was a living thing, a story of chaos resolving into a eager, more beautiful order. When the final, coherent chord faded into the hallowed silence, no one moved. There was no applause. The silence was not empty, it was full, vibrant, and humming with a shared energy. Julian had not used plaid music, he had created a feel of coherence. He had leveled up, and he had taken everyone in the room with him. The promise from the introduction was fulfilled. The chaotic feeling of falling apart had been alchemized into a masterpiece, a profound experience of shared quantum alignment. After a long moment, a single person began to clap, and then another, until the small chapel was filled with a sound more beautiful than any standing ovation he had ever received. He had successfully broadcast his new reality, transforming a room of strangers with the power of his alignment. This is the culmination of his journey, but it is also a beginning. What happens when a new, powerful frequency is released into the world? As the audience slowly began to depart, their faces changed, softer and more contemplative than when they had arrived. Several people approached Julian, struggling to find words for their experience. It was like listening to geometry, one young artist said. I didn't just hear it, I felt it in my bones, said another. But the most significant encounter was with Marcus. His former agent stood before him, his usual cynical armor completely gone, his eyes holding a look of profound, bewildered respect. Julian, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I have no idea what that was. But it was the truest thing I have ever heard. In that moment, Julian knew his old world had not been destroyed, but transformed by his new truth. The long-term consequences of that single performance unfolded with a grace and synchronicity that Julian now understood as the universe's natural way. One of the critics in attendance wrote a stunning review, not for a major publication, but for an influential international arts blog. He didn't describe the music in technical terms, but as a sonic healing, a journey into the implicate order. That blog post was read by a woman in California who ran a foundation dedicated to the intersection of art, science, and consciousness. She flew to Amsterdam to meet him. She didn't offer him a record deal or a world tour. She offered him something infinitely better, a residency. A long-term grant to continue his research with Aris, to compose an entire catalogue of this resonant music and to perform it in acoustically significant spaces around the world, churches, temples, even natural amphitheaters. His
life had not returned to what it was. It had leveled up to a dimension he could never have conceived of from his old state of being. He was no longer just a musician. He was a pioneer, a sonic architect exploring the very fabric of consciousness. His journey from dissonance to coherence has created a new life and a new art form. His frequency is now stable and radiant. But what is the next evolution for a soul who has learned to compose the music of the universe itself? 1 year later, we see Julian not in a concert hall, but in a bright, modern hospital room. A patient is lying on a bed, connected to monitors. Julian is sitting at a specially designed portable keyboard, playing a soft, coherent, spiraling melody. He is working with a team of doctors on a pilot program studying the therapeutic effects of resonant sound on cellular healing. He looks over at Eris, who is observing from the corner of the room, and they share a smile. He had thought his journey was about saving his own life, but he had discovered it was about learning to offer a new frequency of healing to the world. He learned to listen to the chaos within and discovered it was the sound of his own unique song. What song is your soul waiting to compose from the feelings you fear the most? That feeling of inner chaos, of dissonance, is not a sign that you are broken. It is the sound of your energetic system preparing for a profound upgrade. It is a call from your future self, beckoning you toward a higher state of being. Your only task is to learn to listen, to trust the process, and to have the courage to become the person who can embody that new frequency. What is one dissonant feeling in your life right now that you could choose to see as the raw material for your own level up? Share your intention in the comments below. For more stories that decode the language of the universe and guide you through your own quantum alignment, make sure you subscribe and join our community of conscious creators.